welcome to the Stop Shitting All Over Yourself podcast with me, your host, Manessa Konecki. We are so blessed to have an incredible guest with us today, Jaime Heidel, the articulate autistic, who is also the author of What Did I Do Wrong?, which is a guidebook for neurotypical people to be able to engage in a healthy way with their autistic loved ones. I actually find this helpful overall, not just though the book is written way more for like people with whom you are familiarly close or friendly close. It actually has a lot of really great tools in there if you also manage autistic employees, or if you are an autistic employee, a resource for your manager to be able to learn how to work with you better. You know, one of the things that comes up on LinkedIn all the time these days that I've been seeing, and it's really, I think it's one of a very powerful message, which is that, you know, a lot of times the education around autistic and non-autistic people engaging together comes from either masking on the part of the autistic individual, or like here, this is how you're expected to behave in society, or this is what you're supposed to say, or this is how you're supposed to show up, or whatever. And then you get the blueprint, autistic person, and then you have to be the one to make the changes, implement them, and do the things. There is an initiative out there and a school of thought that says, what if we also educated neurotypical individuals, colleagues in the workplace, people in our lives, about what some of these misunderstandings entail, where they come from, and like how they can engage better with their autistic loved ones and or colleagues and or friends and so on. So I found her approach incredibly refreshing, but also really easy to follow. So as someone who's autistic, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. It explains a lot about the misunderstandings that have existed in my life over the course of the last, my lifetime. And having worked with many autistic and neurodivergent individuals in the workplace, I can also see how valuable this is for those of us both as employees and as managers. So without further ado, I'm going to take you into the conversation that I had with the articulate autistic about navigating neurodivergent misunderstandings. So let's listen in. This podcast is really about, like, I'm 47 years old. I was raised and socialized as a what? I'll give you a moment there to brace with that thing.
You know what, though? You know what? It is an autistic thing. It
really
is. It's so fun. Okay, so I would have put you at about 37.
Well, thank you. Listen, I've waited for my Star Trek 47 year for a long time.
I'm 44 and I get it. A lot of times people just now it depends on lighting and makeup and all that other stuff. But when, before I
would have put you in your 30s also. Like I would have put both of us in our 30s.
Both of us, yeah.
Totally. We're like 30 something. We know nothing. We're still children. It's great.
Sometimes though, I really do feel that way. I'm like, how am I a middle-aged adult?
It's how I'm still alive. Sometimes I wonder, like, how do I keep myself alive from a day to day? Like my wife helps me.
Yes, I know. Same. Yes.
Okay. So, and I realized that because we're both autistic and we're both have ADHD, that we're going to go off the rails like a dozen times.
No, totally. And that's actually sometimes that is the best conversations, because when I meet somebody who's ADHD like me, it's kind of hilarious, because I had a really great interview and talk. There is a woman, Holly Blanc Moses, and she has a podcast as well. And her and I are ADHD, both of us, and the two of us were just going on tangents. But it worked. It worked as a really good presentation. So I can't get mad at that.
Well, I feel like also I'm very spiritual, right? I got the woo in me. And so it's like the universe takes us where we need to go, right? And so we just sort of go in that direction. So okay, so
the universe literally got me to unmask in front of you instantly, because I started to get annoyed, and I'm like, you should have seen me. I was all set up, and I'm like, okay,
right now.
I'm all set up. I'm ready to go. I'm the lighting's good. Everything's good. And then you're like, oh, let's move this to Zoom. It doesn't work. Okay, fine. So then I'm getting annoyed. And then I'm like, okay, so I got to fix my background again, which is a tiny little space. And I'm like, I'm like, you get to see me annoyed right away. So let's just get it all out right out. Now.
Well, I recognize myself. Like I could see myself happening right there. And I was like, God, I understand how I just did this. Like I should, but you know how it is. Like we talked about earlier. Here's the thing, right? And this is why I wanted to have you on the show. Okay. My audience is all people who either have someone autistic or ADHD in their family, I should have a question about this later on. Like I thought about this earlier, is because or they themselves say something to me, and I've heard this I more times than I can count, as I'm sure you have as well. My children are all autistic or have ADHD, or my spouse, but I'm kind of sure that I am too, but I'm undiagnosed, right? And I hear that a lot, and I used to say that a lot. And I read an article this one place that said, we're gaslighting ourselves in that moment, right? When we're saying, well, I'm because we're undiagnosed, some medical professional who honestly, what has the research really been on it? Hasn't
Hmm.
said the stamp, we won't own it.
Yeah.
So a lot of our conversation today really is for my listeners who almost to validate, like, so I'd
Okay.
love to
Yeah.
hear a little bit about, because like your
Validation is
story,
my jam. So
I
yeah,
know, well, your story resonated with me and validated my story. So I'd actually love to, like, I found you on LinkedIn. Let's start with that. Did you appear out of nowhere? Like, I have
I
no idea
did.
how I found you.
I do that.
You're just like poof, and I'm like, "Shit." And then I was like, oh wait, hi, how are you doing? Because I don't like to be startled. Um, but you were brilliant, and you spoke to my soul, and I was just like, it took me less than 2 seconds to be like, please be on my podcast, and I went through down the Jaime Heidel rabbit hole, and now I'm curious to know. Tell for everyone who does not know everything about you, like me, I do now. Tell tell them what prompted you to write, like, tell us about your story and what prompted you to write the book.
Okay. So my story, oh my gosh.
That's a
I
short
don't know where to
question.
begin. I okay, so I am a Gen X. I'm in the Gen X category. And so I was a child in the 80s and 90s when, I mean, I never heard the term autism. I never heard autistic, neurodivergent. Those weren't words that were used back then. And I'm sure people were diagnosed, but it had to be very physically obvious, I guess. I'm not really sure how to phrase that. So I would do pretty well in school, but it was more like I would do really well in English or I would do really well in art, but I couldn't do math to save my life. So that whole like, all autistic people can do math. No, I cannot. I am very dyscalculic. Calculic. I can't even say that word. I cannot do math at all. Math terrifies me. I have a phobia of it. And there were other it was that spiky skills profile where I was really, really excelled and went way above and beyond in English. Like I want to say in third grade, I was reading at a high school level, but
Mhm.
I couldn't do even the most basic math that a kindergartner could do. So we started off with the spiky skills. But before that, I was put in kindergarten at 4.5 years old because they thought I was a genius. I wasn't. They put me in there and they thought, well, I was very well spoken. I was very well spoken at a very young age. So they were like, oh, well, she must be really smart and she can do this, that, and the other thing. And they put me in kindergarten and I had no social skills at all, none. And so I don't remember kindergarten. That was 40 years ago. But I remember kind of feeling like I'm very tactile. So I
Mhm.
was probably, like touching, like looking at the shirts and like, oh, I would probably touch kids' shirts or their hair, or I had no sense of boundaries. Everything for me was a very tactile thing. But because I spoke well and I seemed like I knew what was going on, that you know what I mean? It's hard to explain. I was just this walking anomaly. I was a walking anomaly in my family, in my, as I grew up with I didn't really have friends. I had people who sort of tolerated me. I had a few close friends, but they were I actually ended up moving to another town. So the person I was friends with, the one person I managed to make as a friend, I didn't really see her very often. And so I had people who were sort of acquaintances with me, but not really like friends. And I got into trouble all the time. I think that one of my memories, like the strongest memory I have from childhood, is being confused and frightened. And I say that in the book. The feelings that I had all the time were confusion and fear. Because for me, and it could be at school, it could be at home, no matter what I did, I was being yelled at for stuff, but I didn't know what those things were. I knew I was in trouble, but then if I asked, what did I do wrong? I wasn't told. People, because I was raised by boomers, and that generation is, children are to be seen and not heard, and there was all this respect. There was such emphasis on respect, and at my age I still don't understand that word fully. I really don't.
Me either. And I struggled with that a lot. is that I don't understand, why should I respect you? I remember saying that. It's like, you haven't done anything. And
No, same. And then, I mean, you don't want to know what happened after that
oh
when
my
that came
God,
out.
that you do not say that. Like, whoa.
That would be an R-rated episode that we're not, or a big trigger warning episode that we're not going to get into. But suffice it to say, I was physically and emotionally abused. I mean, I went through that my whole life. I was bullied mercilessly in school, mercilessly. Like, I remember coming home and saying, I'm being bullied, because that's the word you used. I'm being picked on, I'm being bullied. And when people think of bullying and being picked on, they think, oh, well, there's a couple of kids shoving you around in the playground, or they're making fun of you. They're doing something. No, no, no. This was an entire school that had a campaign against me. People either hated me or didn't know me. And I tried explaining that when I was 15. And because it sounded so exaggerated and like it wasn't possible, people would believe me.
Right.
And I was like, no, these people, like, even the teachers can't stand me. It was like, and it wasn't like I was going around doing something so horrible. It was just that I was so different and such an anomaly, and I wasn't communicating or using the same language, that I think, looking back on it, that everybody got kind of an uncanny valley from me. It was like,
Got
she
like a
looks like
what?
us, but uncanny valley. You don't know that? Oh, okay. Uncanny valley is a description of, like, let's say, when we look at human looking androids,
Yeah.
or you watch a movie like Cats with like I've never seen it, but
Yeah, like it's like
like
human,
AI,
but
like
like
it's
not.
right. So what happens with the uncanny valley is that people who see something that looks human but isn't quite, that makes them incredibly uncomfortable. And it's a scientific term. It makes
Yeah,
them
yeah, yeah. No,
incredibly
I know what
incredibly
you're
uncomfortable.
talking about. I've heard of the phenomenon before. I didn't know it had a name though, but like I know what you mean. It's like it
Yes.
makes people
So
uncomfortable. Yeah,
that,
yeah.
yeah. So I
So
think that's what I was giving off, was like an uncanny valley, like I wasn't quite human, so I was treated as a subhuman. And that's the thing that I have written an article about this, about the bullying of autistic kids, where it can be so much more extreme, because you're not even seen as a person, and they don't even know, like, they're not thinking in their young brains like, oh, I don't see this person as human. This is a very visceral, very
yeah,
primal
yeah, no,
reaction.
absolutely.
So
That's so, can I pause you on that? Because I
yes, of
think that's
course.
a
I
really
mean, you're
interesting.
gonna have to if you're gonna get me to shut up.
No, 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 because I think this is super interesting, right? Because like, and this isn't like, hold on, give me a sec. I lost my train of thought, but it's
It's
actually a
okay. It's
really good
okay.
one.
Take your
Oh,
time. Take your time.
is that this goes back to, one of my big things for myself is I've been working on decolonizing myself, right, in many different ways, because so much of like, and it's really, so I grew up in Pakistan and I moved here when I was 22. And so it was very different for me coming to America because, well,
I can
actually, I
imagine.
moved here when I was 18 and I lived here for 3 months and I was so culture shocked. I moved to Monmouth, Oregon. I was so culture shocked that I went back home to Pakistan and stayed there for another 2 to 3 years. I grew up a little bit and then I came back, and then I was sort of able to assimilate. But I worked really hard to assimilate, like
Okay.
really, really hard. And obviously now, like as an adult, like on the other side of it, I regret so much of what I did to like, get to whatever. But the point is like I'm starting to like look at things as colonialism, capitalism, the patriarchy, all these things that are like I call them the four horsemen of our conditioning that like
Mhm.
made us, unbeknownst to us, influenced all these things, right?
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm bringing this up specifically is because back in I think it was the 20s, and I know I'm going to mess the date up because and some in the details, but the actual is the that concept where they were starting to rate people based off of their skull shape and their eye shapes and those kinds of things, right?
Yep.
And I was actually telling my wife the other day about how I feel like at some point I wonder how much of our innate knowing we have lost about how to exist in a society as a almost just as with our differences, right? And
Right.
not like with our differences like in the I'm tolerating you or you're tolerating me, but in a space of more like collaboration and community and love,
Yes.
right? Like that kind
Yeah.
of place, right? And so I think it's very, when you bring that up specifically, I wanted to just name that as like as like a consequence of conditioning over the years of like people wonder, well, what does knowing that have to do with anything? Knowing our history in that way. And like that's what it has to
It
do
has
with,
everything to do with it.
is that anyone who is different in any way and doesn't meet that And, whereas like that, like you and I would probably have just been totally normal, like everybody's totally normal, right? Like everybody's
Right.
totally
We would have
normal
just
because
been
everybody's weird. There's no normal.
right. We would have just been doing things that were normal or typical for us, and nobody would have wanted to throw us into a ravine. So yeah, I
Exactly, right.
mean,
Or well, there was a well outside my town, my city that so like so but that's the thing, right? Like that is
but it's that, and I didn't even mean to get into this, but it's that level of, and I've been thinking about writing about this or talking about this, and I don't know how, but it's a level of, I don't want to say hatred, but I guess that's the only word I can think of, that it goes so far beyond bullying. It's like you feel like people want to destroy you, and you become this target or this scapegoat. And
I think that it goes back to this idea that anybody who is different, right? It's that poem, right? They came for so and so, and then they come for so and so, and then it's like eventually they come for everybody, right?
it was obviously made it very clear that I was bullied mercilessly in school. I think we covered that. But when I moved out on my own, I moved out on my own very, very young. I was only 17 when I moved out. And then of course I had to go into the corporate world because I wasn't going to college. We just couldn't afford to do it. And plus I didn't have the grades. So that was fine. So I started going into the business world, and I was doing temp jobs, and I was doing, what you usually do, just like department stores and things like that. And, if you don't have any credentials, you kind of start at the bottom,
Mhm.
and which was fine. But when I started to get into office work, because it was something it was just kind of easy to do, and sort of easy. I mean, I didn't do very well in retail. So I tried to move into office work. And, I used to think that everyone around me, and I do mention this in the book, is that I thought everyone around me something was wrong. Just something was just wrong with them mentally, emotionally. I didn't know what it was. But I used to think that it was just, the people around me were explosive and they would just explode on for no reason. And then I would go to work and I would have similar things happen. And I think probably by the time I was 24, I'm like, I think it's me. But it took me so long. And I was like, I remember having a conversation with a supervisor. And I remember just telling him kind of with tears in my eyes and going, because he was actually being very kind. And I was just like, I don't understand it, but people have this reaction to me. And I don't know what it is. I said, this seems to happen everywhere I go. And then I remember thinking that was the first time it ever dawned on me that maybe I was the problem, or at least I was the catalyst. So, I remember I started masking at around that age. Like I started watching what other people did and I started to copy them. And I noticed that they started treating me a little bit better. I was still very low on the totem pole, but at least they weren't actively bullying me or harassing me. And then I went up the ladder, and I went, not up the ladder. I kind of went sideways on the ladder because I would lose jobs a lot, but I would go to different places. And there was a place that really kind of accepted me. They were kind of quirky people there, so that kind of worked. But every job I had, I would either get, written up, reprimanded, fired, told off. But my performance reviews would be good, but yet they would be like, well, socially or this, that, and the other thing. But I think the disconnect was nobody, even through my 20s and my 30s, and then in my mid 30s, I had a breakdown, and a lot of other things happened. But throughout all of that, nobody ever, oh my God, wow, precarious setup. Throughout that entire time of my life, nobody answered that one burning question: what did I do wrong?
Yeah.
And so I started writing. I started writing about my experiences, and then I started doing videos, and then I set up some social media, and it just happened one day. I just started it. And at first I was writing and blogging about natural health, and then I moved it over totally to the autistic experience, especially after I was diagnosed. I was diagnosed at 35. And then after that, that's just what I went into. And then I want to say a few years later, I started writing under the articulate autistic because, as I said, in the beginning of the conversation of talking about my life, is that even when I was like 4 years old, I was considered articulate. I was called that all the time and said, well, she can't have this problem because she's so articulate. She
Right.
can't possibly not understand this because she speaks so well, or because she reads so well. I'm hyperlexic. Well, I used to be, not anymore, but I used to be a voracious reader, and I read well above my grade level when I was younger. So it was just the kind of the contradiction in like, but you can't have these problems and be confused about these things because you're so well spoken. So that's how I came up with the Articulate Autistic, and then it's kind of spiraled from there. I have my Instagram page where I do discussions about 3 times a week, discussion questions, and I wrote the book and published it. I started writing it in March of last year, and then I published it in September of last year. So that's how we got to the book. It's a
Wow,
long
it's
story,
so
but
new. Oh my God, I didn't realize how
yeah,
new it
yeah,
was.
it's not even 6 months old yet. It
Oh
will
my
be
God,
it
it's
will be 6
amazing.
months.
So here's what I
Oh,
can't remember how I found you, honestly, but I started masking at a very young age. Very, very young. I've actually been masking my whole life, right? Actually, and so there were twice that I started masking. So the first one was when I was little, and I can remember what it was, right? Like, and actually I remember somebody said that I looked pretty, right? And I said, I know, right? Because I did look really pretty that day. Boy, was that a mistake. That was a mistake.
I've made that same one.
And I was told that I was rude and obnoxious and I was like, oh my God. And I didn't understand what I did wrong. And to this day, when I think about it, I'm still like, but what did I do wrong? Like you said it, I did look good, but you're
Yeah.
supposed to say thank you. And it's like, well, why the fuck were you complimenting me then? Was it so that I could say thank you to you or because I look pretty? Right. But
That first one, yeah.
so that was one. And then the second was when I was 11. So when I was 11, I came out as a boy, and I wasn't actually a boy. I didn't actually understand then that I was non-binary, gender fluid, but we didn't have that language then. We had Boy George, right? Who was like really like, I was like, I get you. I don't understand what I get, but I get you.
Yeah.
Like everyone who looked like a peacock, I was like, I get you. Why do I get you? And so, but I had a very similar experience. So I found this because you talked about the experience at work. So I want to come back to that because I think we can talk about 800 different things, honestly. And so I want to like make sure I want to pick the things that I'm like, all right, these are the things that I think are super important related to my audience specifically, who are many of whom are leaders in research administration and who have people who have worked under them who are autistic or myself, right? Now, I had a very different workplace experience in that I've actually been very lucky to always work with my sister, and she is gifted at translating neurotypical to autistic.
Oh, nice.
And she has ADHD, and I think that, and she just also has many other gifts. So my so she was able to translate, and then I've had a boss. I had a long-term boss who also does not understand that she does this, but she's also good at doing that.
Oh, good.
And
We need more
so
translators in the world.
we do, and that's what made me understand, because I see people who I've worked with now and I've worked with who are ADHD, and they I'm trying to think of like how to phrase this, right? They manifest the same kind of challenges that you're talking about that really just need someone to be able to translate that to them so that they can be successful. And the
Yes.
reason why I sort of want to go in that space is because, you mentioned that your performance reviews were great. Mine are also always great. A lot of people who are ADHD have their performance is stellar because, as you mentioned, they are really good out
Mhm.
of whatever it is that they're really good at, right? Like we all have our own thing,
Yeah.
but whatever our special interest is, we're really good at it.
Yeah.
Right? And so I'm curious to know, like, what is it that employers are giving up by not learning the language of their neurodivergent employees?
Sameness. The status quo. The way things are done, tradition, social hierarchy, power, secrets. Those are the things that they would be giving up if they employed more neurodivergent people. There's nothing wrong with employing neurodivergent people, but we tend to point out the elephant in the room. So if there's something going on that they want to keep under wraps, we are going to very innocently point out that it's there. I've done it.
Oh, very much
And
for
people
sure.
are like, there is a social hierarchy that comes with the neurotypical society has a different view on social hierarchy. And I know as an autistic person, I didn't even know what social hierarchy was until I was in my 30s. I didn't even understand it. I didn't see it. I didn't know it was there. I mean, I knew you had to speak to your boss in a certain way, but I didn't understand about like the chain of command where, you couldn't go to the person above your boss because you got along
Oh
with
yeah,
them
yeah,
better,
yeah, totally. I
which
still
is what
don't.
I
I'm
did.
still
I
like
didn't know.
whatever else.
I had no idea. So, but I don't think there's anything to lose by employing neurodivergent people. I think there's actually a lot of benefit in employing neurodivergent people. but you also have to be willing to change. And this goes back to your talking about capitalism. You have to go back, you have to change or be willing to look at, introducing something new into the dynamic. And I think the reason neurodivergent people rub people the wrong way is because we will point out the elephant in the room. We'll be very direct with our thoughts. We'll just ask a question. And I think you think question asking wouldn't be this big of a deal, but I know that asking questions is something I've gotten in trouble with my whole life, because instead of seeing it as inquisitive and wanting to learn and wanting to understand, which is the only reason I ever ask questions.
Why are you challenging authority? Why
Exactly.
are you challenging me?
Yes, exactly. And so if there's this thought about authority and hierarchy, and, I really think that neurodivergent people are more collaborative, just naturally more collaborative people. So if you've got this very sort of staunch, we do things this way, this is traditionally how we do it, and the autistic person were to say, oh, well, why do we do it that way? I mean, the boss would want to verbally fling them across the room because it would trigger something in them and make them angry. And it's like, we're just trying to understand why it's done this way. Yeah. But the neurotypical supervisor is translating it as, oh, you're questioning my authority, or you're questioning my knowledge. I mean, I was in my 20s and I was questioning people in their 50s and 60s, like, well, why do we do it this way? But they were seeing it not as genuine curiosity and wanting to understand. They were seeing it as a challenge. And I'm like, I'm not trying to challenge you. So I don't think they have anything to lose except for the way they've always done things. And the way they've always done things isn't exactly the best. I mean, I don't know how to say that in a nicer way.
I mean, honestly, there isn't, like, here's the thing, right? It's like, they worked at the time, like all of these systems, processes, whatever it is that we were doing at the time, like we were adapting to whatever the circumstances were. And now we know better, so we can do better.
Yeah.
But I think, but problem is that I think that so many, and I think this is something that, I think is almost like, I feel sad because there's a lot of judgment associated with, right? So like,
I'm still listening to you.
Yeah, I figured you were fixing them with the camera. So let's say that there's like I do ask you a question, right? And as a neurotypical person, you're seeing it as a challenge, right?
Yeah.
Like, you may also be seeing it as a judgment, right? As like, I'm judging you or whatnot.
Yes.
But I'm not trying to do that. And so like, and until this moment, it actually didn't even occur to me that that might be happening. So like all this time I'm thinking about this and I'm like, oh, well, yeah, okay, I can see why you'd be mad, but that's not what I was doing. And in the end, I tried to explain that and it really doesn't work.
Right, because the more you explain things, the more you look
like you're making excuses.
Exactly. And then more it sounds like you're lying and trying to cover your tracks. Yep.
Oh, right. Yeah. And so I think that's like, I think that's something that's very interesting is that, there's a lot of benefit to having a neurodivergent person, and listening to that neurodivergent person and working with them because, we are in a space where everybody's talking about wanting to enact change. And the person who's going to point out those things is going to be the neurodivergent person because they're not going to realize that maybe they should keep their mouth shut because that's what society has said that you need to do, which is perfect, right?
Yeah.
And I think that, you mentioned that, just to go back to what you said, I want to jump back to where you said that.
Oh, yeah, please do.
Your performance review doing good, is because a lot of times if people are willing to work with someone in terms of meeting them halfway, like creating receptors to meet, so neurodivergent, neurotypical, creating receptors to like kind of meet each other in the middle, there's an opportunity for like a really beautiful synergy there.
Yes, there is.
And I think that that's really where this book comes in, right? Because my wife and I, since learning that I was neurodivergent and understanding that I'm autistic, we've started following more people on Instagram. I've started sharing some, and like, we're now starting to see the things that we always joked about as quirks of mine they're just normal for somebody who has ADHD. It's like, oh my God, so totally normal, right?
Yeah.
And one of the ones in here, and I'm actually going to completely segue into something else because I realize what time it is and I don't want to miss this one because this is going to be the one that my sister is going to, she hears this, she's going to be like, holy shit. Okay. This one, when I heard this, I was okay. So for everybody, it's on page 50 because it's going to fucking blow your mind. Like, the breathing. Okay. So I constantly am doing this thing where I'm like, okay.
Yep.
And always. I've had people be like, what's wrong? I'm like, nothing's wrong. I'm just breathing. Right.
Yeah, nothing. Or so bad. You can read it, it's fine, but it's so like you said the breathing, and I'm like the breathing.
The breathing
Go
is just,
ahead.
no,
I'm
no,
sorry.
no.
I don't want to cut
Okay,
you off.
so it was, wait, hold on. You said being bored. So we come off as being bored or disinterested. It's like, why are you breathing like that? You're just sighing a lot. Oh my God, what does the sighing mean? That's actually always a really good one. I like that one. The air hunger. Okay, so you talk about air hunger. Can you talk to me about? I used to think I was dying. I forget to breathe.
Yeah.
Tell me what this is.
I wish I could tell you what it was. I know that I have looked at there. There is a study out that does talk about autism and air hunger. If you look up autism plus air hunger in Google, you will find it. I'm not exactly sure what causes it. I don't even remember the study. My memory is terrible, but I know there is a scientific study that explains that there is a correlation. I know that I have really bad allergies, so breathing has always been difficult for me. I used to breathe through my nose and all this stuff. I love Stranger Things, but I hate that
Oh
the
my
name
God,
for.
me too. I'm like, I'm a mouth breather. Stop.
But I'm a mouth breather, so stop. It's so frustrating. I'm like, okay, fine.
You and
Pick
I
on
both
people
now.
with
I'm gonna
allergies,
flip
whatever.
this because
It's
seriously, we're mouth breathers and it's not bad.
no, it's not bad. But I mean, it was the 80s. Everything was bad. Remember? I mean,
Oh my
we
God,
were
it was these. No, except smoking. Smoking was
no
really good.
small, but then when we know better, we do better, right? But so the mouth breather thing always bothers me. But that's fine. I can't, you got to pick your
I
battles.
get it. No, I'm with you too, but I just wanted
But
you to
I
know I
was like,
feel on this so
I
hard.
remember being a child or a teenager, especially. For one, like I said, allergies, can't breathe. But I am somebody who is constantly needing to fill my lungs. Like I need to feel that expanse. That could be a sensory thing too, but I need to feel that expanse. And I feel like I'm never getting enough air. Now, I don't know if I don't have asthma as far as I know, but I'm not exactly sure what the mechanism is. But like you said, you forget to breathe. I forget to breathe, or I breathe very, very, very shallowly, and then I don't realize I'm doing it. And then all of a sudden I take a really deep breath. But I've always breathed that way. And another thing that I say, and I say this a lot in the book, is when you're going to tell somebody what they did wrong or what they did wrong, I mean, breathing is not wrong, but when you're going to tell somebody what they're talking about, you got to tell them what they did. Don't skip over that because, I know that I probably used to be sighing. I'd be like, whatever. And somebody would turn around, what's your problem? And I didn't know what they were responding to. I didn't know. I never made the connection to how I just breathed to what they were saying because I didn't realize I was sighing. That was just
Also, who
normal for
registers that, right? Like I only registered it when 800 people pointed out, and I'm like, oh yeah, I
right.
do
And
sigh a
I
lot.
was
So
like,
otherwise,
wait,
you
my
never even
breathing?
mentioned how
Like,
you
I don't
breathe.
understand. What are you talking about? So nobody would say, Jamie, you just sighed until someone finally said it. And I was like, yes, I did. Well, why do you keep sighing so deeply like that? I don't know. Like, I never noticed it. That's just
Breathing.
how I breathe. And I think I think I said this in the book too. I said there was somebody that I was friends with in camp who thought I was flirting with them because
Oh,
I
you
was
mentioned that
sighing.
in the book, and you were like, what? Oh, that there is that line where people like it's like with the mixed matches where people are flirting with you and you don't know it, or they think
Right. No, and I
that.
never know that. But people even
I
took my breathing as meaning I was flirting. I'm like,
Well, because
no,
the
I'm
heaving
just
bosom. This was
breathing.
the 80s, okay? The heaving bosom. Well, I don't have a bosom
Yeah,
anymore. They did at
exactly.
one
That
point.
was just, oh my, no, I'm
Like,
just
oh my
breathing. Leave
word.
me alone. Yes.
Um, I think that, what has been really helpful for me, and and I realize now that we're sort of at the end, I try to keep these under an hour, so we're nearing the end, and I've had so much fun. First of all, like I was like, I have no idea how it's gonna go, and I knew it was gonna be fun because we're both ADHD, so it's gonna go all over the place. But I feel like this book is I was talking about my wife and I, and one of the things early on in our relationship, we almost like she was supposed to be a one night stand, honestly. She came over, and we both didn't know at the time we were lesbians, right? Because she hadn't come out yet. And so we U-hauled. She never left. She just moved in, and it was like that was it. And I didn't even know there was a thing until years later we came out as lesbians, like, oh, there you U-hauled. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, great. But we almost didn't make it past that original first couple years because of all of there were so many misunderstandings. It was absolutely insane. And at the time, I actually didn't even understand. I didn't know I was autistic at the time.
Yeah.
But we started exactly what you're talking about related to something else, which was name the thing. and describe the feeling and then say what the other action is, right? Just because I may not understand what you were expecting out of that
Yeah.
action, right? Because when you say I was just breathing, well, the following question is what did you expect breathing to be like, right? Like, what is breathing supposed to be like, right? Like, and so now
Right.
someone
Yeah.
here listen to me, and you're like, oh, that's not how I breathe. And then now you have a conversation about how weird it is that people breathe so differently, and now you have like a completely different experience of it as
Yeah.
opposed to one. And so our conversations again started with more of what you were saying, curiosity, right? And I
Okay.
think that that's the big difference between neurotypical and neurodivergent is that neurotypical is very tense. And I don't mean that people are judgy, they're more afraid of being judged.
Yeah.
And neurodivergent is more about curiosity, right? Because, and so we'll ask the question, we're not worried about judging someone or feeling like they're going to be judged because this has nothing to do with judgment. I'm just literally just asking a question. And so
Right.
I think that like there is a translation matrix that's almost necessary of assuming that the person that you're with has best intentions, right? So you may be
Yes,
sitting there sighing,
absolutely.
but like I can just assume there's nothing wrong unless you tell me there's something wrong.
Right.
Um, I love how this is a blueprint to create a translation for anyone. So now as adults, she and I now know this. And so this now is basically like, here, babe, this is how you get to know me, right? In a way that you didn't before, which is really exciting. It's an exciting way to get to know your parents, your kids, your siblings, your employees. And it's so accessible. Like, I love how you wrote this. Like, it's written for, I literally read it laying before a nap because it didn't, you know how like it's so overwhelming, like books sometimes can get overwhelming, right? And like this didn't
Yeah.
feel overwhelming at all. It felt like I could read it and apply it immediately. So I just want to thank you on behalf of like me and everybody who is
You are
autistic
so welcome.
for writing this book. And I want to
I
ask
am
you,
planning on doing, just so you know, I haven't really come out with this formally, but I am planning on writing a work version of this book. So specifically for The Office.
I love that. And I'd
Yeah,
like
I
to,
already have a kind of a title in mind, and I'm going to probably get structure it the same way, but a little bit differently because you're talking to supervisors and CEO of companies. But yeah, I plan on doing a work version and a school version as well. But that'll be down the line. But those are my plans. That's what I
I
plan to do.
love that. And the work version, because I wish that I had had something like that. Because I tried to explain to my boss I'm neurodivergent and so on, but it's not all of us are educators, right? So like I can educate on a lot of things, but this
Yeah,
is not one of them. And so
yeah,
I don't know how to advocate for myself and I don't know how to ask for what I need. And I really struggle for it in the moment. I'm very strong in other ways, but I'll be honest, when I'm in a space where I feel like what did I do wrong? Or like you know, I'm suddenly four, and so I don't have that.
I mean,
And
one of my favorite things to do besides writing is advocating. So I do offer private consultations, and I will offer, it's basically translation. So, like, let's say you're having trouble speaking to someone who's neurotypical, whether they're your boss or your family member, as long as they're open, they have to be
yeah,
open. They have to at least believe you. I will translate for you and do that as well.
that is I'm so glad you brought that up because I think that that is something that a lot of people could use. And actually, as a complete aside, I am so glad that you're writing that book for the workplace because I
I
think
do.
that that
I
is
haven't started it yet, but I definitely plan to do it soon because it's a lot of people have asked me, have said, are you going to do one for, I wish I could give this to my boss, but it's more, the way it's written is more aimed like at family, friends, partners, that sort of thing. I mean, it can be used for anyone, but for like parents and stuff, teachers, but it's not specifically corporate. So I have to figure out how to kind of translate that over to corporate. But yeah, I definitely want to because this is something that people have been asking for and it's something I love doing. So, and I already write for a website where I write all about work related stuff. So I want to, I do want to create a book around the same concept.
And that's actually how I found you, by the way. And honestly, it happened so fast. Like literally, I found you like 8 days ago, and an article showed up in my feed, and I felt like it literally spoke to me. I mean, that's just how I do it because I'm like, oh my God, I love you, please, because we have to. My whole thing is shed the shame, get rid of the shame. Nobody needs shame about anything, and
Mhm.
no one I feel like one of the parts of shedding shame is getting to understand each other, right? And like there's so much shame with being like I held so much shame being neurodivergent for so many years, not even knowing that I was, right? But I had shame about
Right.
the way it manifested, right? Like, and
Yeah.
so I was ashamed about 50 different things. Now I'm not ashamed of any of those things,
Well,
right?
I wanted to ask you, have you been in DBT? Because stop shooting on yourself is DBT language.
I don't even know what DBT is, so no.
Okay, that's dialectical behavior therapy. It's something that I actually did. I don't not an advocate for behavior therapy, like really, but DBT for me was different because I'm also alexithymic, so it helped me to understand what emotions I was even feeling because I wasn't really very connected to them. And
Yeah.
one of the things they say in DBT is stop shooting on yourself. That's what they say. That is a DBT thing that people say. So I thought, well, that might be where you got it from. But yeah, that's
No, okay, so let me tell you something even more interesting. I actually can see where it may have come from. So one of my listeners named it. So I actually am shitty at naming things. I am very good at a lot of things, but naming things is not one of them. So I name things like a 2-year-old. Like it's if it's a donkey, it's named donkey, right? I just name it what it literal naming. So I was going to call it, I can't remember something. The name was bad. It was very literal. And now actually it makes sense. She said, "No, you're not naming it that. You're naming it Stop Shitting All Over Yourself." And I was like, "Oh my God, that's so good." And but she, I have no idea if her kid is autistic, but she may have gotten it or just done the DBT, like for any reason.
yeah, yeah. Some
She
people
may
do
have
it for
gotten
all sorts of
for all
reasons. Like
sorts of
it's usually
reasons. So
not
I
an
didn't know if it
autistic.
was okay. It's like just a thing.
Yeah, it's for mental illness. Actually, people with borderline personality disorder are recommended to do it. People with anxiety, OCD. But for me, just because I also have OCD, it was actually very beneficial for me because of my alexithymia. So they put me in it for a different reason.
Yeah.
But because of my alexithymia, I literally the first thing that they did was give me a sheet of paper with literal cartoon pictures of faces, angry and sad and happy, all these faces, and I had to circle which one I was feeling just to get in touch with my feelings.
Yeah.
And I went through my whole life not realizing I wasn't in touch with my feelings because I'm also a very emotional person. I cry very easily. So
Mhm.
I never thought I wasn't in touch with my feelings. I thought if anything, I was overly in touch with them. But the DBT helps me to understand, like, oh, this is the feeling that I'm feeling right now. And I wasn't really connected to right now and being more mindful of the feelings that I was feeling. And then it kind of went from that to going into classes that sort of, there's a book, I can't think of the book name, but sort of taught skills that I feel like you should learn when you're like a child. But I didn't have those. So it was like just learning how to uh, process your emotions, how to have I'm not thinking the right word, but just how to manage your emotions. Like I didn't even know emotions could be managed. I didn't understand any of that. So I feel like I was walking around like a child my whole life until I went into that type of therapy and was like, oh, I had no idea at all. I didn't know anything about emotions. And then I learned a lot. And like I said, that's, radical acceptance is a big thing for me. Just accepting myself for who I am completely and just that has helped me a great deal. And DBT, the stop shooting on yourself, because where that comes from is, you know, especially people like us who are very justice oriented, is that people should do this and they should do that, and you get down on yourself and you get sad about the fact that nobody is doing what they should be doing. And
Mhm.
that's where stop shooting on yourself comes from,
It comes from.
or it's like stop having such high expectations of other people, which is really hard for us, but they are not us and we are not them, and they're not going to act the way we do. Just it's not going to happen. So stop, basically putting so much emotional energy into that. And that's where it comes from. So that's where the title of your podcast
Well,
comes
I
from.
had no idea. It's interesting. It's like I love how you described all of that. So I often say how I don't feel like I went finished adolescence till I was like 35. Like I was very old when and
Yes.
I was
Same.
talking to someone the other day, maybe it was my wife, and I was saying how I have actually always been extremely good at, like, my therapist always like, "Oh my God, you're so self-aware," and I can abstract,
Same.
and I am really good at intellectualizing emotions and all of
Yep.
those things. So, there's a lot of, I think, presumed connection, but I myself, and it's interesting that you're the way that you described it. I've actually been doing something similar over the last 5 years as I started to get in touch with my
Mhm.
emotions and things like that, but I didn't know that that's what I was doing. So I went through this exercise, but
Mhm.
here's the thing. I think my therapists were probably guiding me through, because I have a therapist, obviously, and I have been guided through it, but
Okay.
they never once called it that, right? And
Yeah.
so I think that, so as they've just sort of been making suggestions and I've sort of been doing the thing, and so the answer then, I guess, is yes, I have actually gone through that process of, because
I'm now starting to understand, oh, I'm frustrated and that's why I'm getting angry. And like,
Yes,
but
yes,
like I
yes.
before I didn't understand what this feeling was. What I felt was happening was something would happen and I'd be like,
Right, exactly. I couldn't even name the emotion, let alone the response.
oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so it's so spontaneous too, and it happened so fast that it was like I wasn't able to process it by the time I
Yeah.
was feeling it. Dude, this was amazing. You were amazing. I had so much fun talking to you.
You know, if you are a parent or a teacher, paraprofessional, if you are anybody who works with autistic people, autistic kids, adults, teenagers, it doesn't matter. Pick up a copy of What Did I Do Wrong? And it is on Amazon. Right now, it is exclusively on Amazon. I apologize for those who don't have access or prefer not to use Amazon. It is self published and it is the book to help you end those traumatic, confusing, and frustrating misunderstandings you're having with your autistic loved one.